Thanks for being with us today. We have with us Professor Ken Hendrickson, who's also the Dean of the Graduate School at Sam Houston State University. And I wanted to have a conversation with him today about verbal Aikido. We're in times where it's very sort of not natural, and we're in spaces where we're not used to being, and maybe with people for longer periods of time than we're used to, and sort of things may be suboptimal in some respects. And Professor Hendrickson is both a student and proponent of verbal Aikido. And so he's going to help us out today with some things that we can do. So thanks for being with us. And if you don't mind, just tell us, what is verbal Aikido and how did you become interested in it?
So verbal Aikido is a system of rhetorical self-defense. But unlike other systems, it's embedded deeply in the principles of martial Aikido. And Aikido stands apart as a martial art because the object, while defending yourself in a physical encounter, is explicitly not to hurt as much as possible the person who's trying to hurt you. And in verbal Aikido, it's the same kind of idea. When we believe that we're entering into a verbal confrontation, when we're trained in verbal Aikido, we immediately think of three basic goals that we're going to not hurt or save face, not humiliate the person with whom we're dealing, not physically or emotionally hurt them, and that the relationship will be as good or better at the end of the confrontation than it was when it started. Now, of course, that last part can be relative. If it's a very casual, very glancing relationship, then we simply don't want to do any harm or leave a bad memory. If it's a close relationship, then we, of course, want to make sure that quality stays in place. And you accomplish these goals by learning 3 steps, which sounds simple, but definitely you need to explore and practice them. The first one is learning to maintain a center, where you learn to have an appropriate kind of distance and balanced view on life. And at the moment when you think someone is getting aggressive with you verbally, or you think an argument is about to happen, you're able to access that. Put a little distance between yourself and your immediate desire to respond. Maybe get some control of your physiological symptoms of conflict. Everybody's heard of fight or flight. So we know that when a conversation gets tense, sometimes the heart rate increases, or we blush, or we feel some perspiration, or breathing changes. So in step 1, we learn to do something about all that. Step 2 of verbal Aikido, in the martial art, in Japanese, it's called the irimi. It means to accompany the attack. So rather than colliding head on with someone who may be showing some aggression or argumentativeness with us, we learn specific techniques to get kind of metaphorically alongside. And our hope is to kind of direct and guide that energy. The negative energy of the attack that's directed at us. And then step 3, once we've been able to kind of get alongside and direct the force of the attack, we look for openings where we can offer what in Japanese is called aiki, which is the alteration of the energy, restoring balance. And it doesn't mean that there's a happy sort of honeymoon ending. It just means that we successfully dissipate the attack and are able to bring things back to a kind of equilibrium, as they might have been before the verbal attack broke out. So verbal Aikido then has these 3 objectives that we practice with these 3 steps, and the idea is you learn it by exploring what all that means more fully, and then learning to be able to do it reflexively.
So we are living in an age right now where a lot of people are having to stay at home. Yeah. They're not allowed to really travel or get out. What are some verbal Aikido practices that maybe we can use at our house while we're staying with people for longer periods of time than maybe what we're used to?
Yeah, that is the $64,000 question. And so let me start by saying this. So I principally teach verbal Aikido in the work setting at Sam Houston State. And what oftentimes happens when people are learning the basic forms of it, they'll say, this is real interesting and I enjoyed the class and everything, but I don't really have coworkers who really come at me the way you're talking about. But then they'll go home where we don't practice the same formalities, and they'll say, oh, wow, look at there, and maybe, some of us in our family settings have sort of running arguments, things that kind of trigger conflict or discussion, and have done so for a while. And the new student of verbal Aikido suddenly realize, hey, I've got some possibilities here. And then they come back to work and begin to explore the method more deeply. And that's by way of kind of answering your question. I think this has been just an unprecedented. I mean, you know, I'm out of words with the pandemic, and I do think that we'll experience more social distancing and more stay-at-home orders in the coming year. And so, yes, verbal Aikido is a perfect tool for this. What it allows us to do is to take built up conversational energies and provide new options with people who expect old responses. I'll give you an example. In verbal Aikido, or in normal life, you're maybe at home and you've been there for a long time. One thing that I think when people are stressed with each other, no matter what the real cause is, oftentimes the kitchen is a place where it comes out. So maybe someone goes into the kitchen, finds a dirty dish, and then the person A says, you know, what have you done here? Why do you always leave these messes? You never do the dishes, right? If you really love me, you do the dishes. And then a typical response that we do by instinct is, well, I always did the dishes yesterday, and you begin to argue about the dishes when really the conversation is not maybe so much about that. In verbal Aikido, we would be trained reflexively to say, how long have you thought I might not love you? And you draw the conversation back to the first supposition, and then you learn ways to walk that down peacefully until you can get to some core issues and work out places where you can exchange and share with the other person. So if anybody sees this, just think about that. And have you walked into a conversation like that and you end up arguing about the ostensible issue and you don't seem to get to the main issue and it just turns into a stalemated argument? If you've ever felt that, that's an example where you can learn verbal Aikido to change things. And I think these situations have occurred under lockdown. I think another one is in dealing with children, because children and adults reason differently. So for those of us who've had to bring our kids home and to attempt homeschool or to spend unprecedented amounts of time throughout the entire day when we hadn't done that since they were toddlers or weren't so verbal, especially if there's teenagers and there's power issues or authority issues involved, that's a great application for it. And also verbal Aikido is really good for helping to talk compassionately to someone who's afraid. And on again, off again, the flow of this pandemic has made some people feel afraid. And if you're in a home, spending time together, dealing with the stresses of close daily life, plus somebody's afraid, that's a place where your training can help you.
Now, one of the things that will eventually happen at some point is things will come back to some sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
We'll have to start going back to work and transitioning there. Once schools and businesses start opening back up, do you see a space for verbal Aikido at that time and in those spaces?
Yeah, I really do. So verbal Aikido training, even though you don't get to use the words, verbal Aikido training, for example, helps tremendously with an instinct towards road rage. So if you've ever been the kind of person when discourteous driving, you know, that's aimed at you gets you kind of on edge and you'd like to know what to do something about that, verbal Aikido could help. But I use that example because of this. I think here's what's going to happen. First off, it's clear that this has been a shocking event for all of us. Secondly, if you look at the news, people have taken starkly different opinions and approaches to how to deal with it. And their choices make people who disagree with them very nervous. So back and forth they go in that regard. I point again to fear, particularly some of our older citizens as they begin to move about, taking care of their necessary business, are nonetheless going to be nervous because the virus is not going away. We're going to attempt an increase in social life, but we're in this thing till either we get a pill or a shot, and that's going to be months and months and months. There's that. So fear is a factor. And also, please, everyone who hears this, try to remember we've already, unfortunately, had losses, and you just won't know when you're talking to somebody what has happened in their family. Have they had a serious illness in their family? Have they, God forbid, lost a loved one? What that looks like in roughly May of 2020 may be drastically different than what's going to look like in November of 2020. So thinking ahead, A key component in verbal Aikido is to understand the space between the stimulus you get from incoming information and the response you give. And what we want to do is increase that space, to show you how to increase that space. And in that increased space, increase the number of possibilities that you can consider when you finally give your response. That concept, I think, is going to be really important as we emerge back into the public, back into some public events, start to see more people, start to see some crowds, start to think about, is that person more than 6 feet or closer than 6 feet to me? All of these things. We're going to need some skills to communicate while we learn to live and work next to each other again.
Yeah, you know, and that's such an interesting point, is once we start going back into the stores and schools, some people will be wearing masks and gloves, some people won't. How do we sit next to each other while you're really 6 feet away? Just all of these sorts of things. And to have that, as you said, that verbal space there, that time between what they said and our response, we've just got to make that space bigger for us. 6 feet.
Yeah, I can just to add one more thing to that point. I can really see an episode in which people are gathered in a public space, and one person says, "I'm so sick and tired of these social distancing rules. This is ridiculous. This is dumb. Blah blah blah," and within earshot of them is a person who maybe lost a loved one. You know, and then what are you going to do with that? How will we learn forbearance and forgiveness and compassionate, wise communication? Because everybody's got a very strong feeling here.
So for those members of the Sam Houston State University community, faculty, staff, and students, how can they learn more about verbal Aikido?
Well, the first thing is to call me. I am training. So verbal Aikido was founded by a teacher and entrepreneur, Luke Archer, who resides in France, but works and teaches all over Europe, and has for a number of years now come for verbal Aikido events on our campus, usually in the fall. And we'll see what's possible this fall. And Luke has trained me to the level of green belt, so I'm a ranked instructor in the art. So really, honestly, the first thing to do would be to call me. We have a free booklet that people can take and kind of review. I run a mailing list, so if you become interested, you can get your name on the mailing list to receive periodic sort of tips and ideas and availability of classes. We do lunch and learn events where I go grab a room at the LSC and people swing by on their lunch hour and we work on some element of it. And because of the pandemic, I'm learning to conduct Zoom-based classes, which I just started last week, which actually went pretty well. And so then that may be more convenient for people anyway. That may be a permanent feature of verbal Aikido at SAM when all is said and done, to give people access. But to simply contact me, Ken Hendrickson, my email is real simple, HENDRICKSON, Hendrickson@shsu.edu, or call the grad school and just mention verbal Aikido. My whole staff knows about it, and they'll know how to help you.
Well, this is fantastic. Thanks for all that you do. I've taken the training that you've offered. I've been to some of the lunch and learns. I've been to the Luke Archer, and if there's, you know, it's such a valuable thing. And so for what it's worth, I recommend it.
Thank you, Jim.
Take advantage of this. And this is part of your other duties, not as assigned, but as you want to do and contribute to the university, right?
Yeah, this is a service project. So, you know, we all have components of, on the faculty side of teaching, research, and service and administration. You have goals and metrics you meet. But I've taken up and tried to expand verbal Aikido as part of the service mission of the graduate school, both for student body and for staff, particularly those who serve the graduate body, but really anybody on SHSU who feels they can benefit.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And again, thank you for what you do for Sam Houston State.
Thank you for talking to me.